afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a very interesting discussion on sustainable supply chains and post-pandemic recovery. Thank you very much for your time and attention today. And I do hope you enjoy the next hour as much as we enjoyed putting this together. My name is Arun Bruce. I'm Managing Director and Partner with BCG, close to 2 decades, focusing on procurement and supply chains, and many years in the region. And I have with me 2 very senior members of the industry. I have Mr. Shahab Al-Jasmi, Director Ports from DP World for the region. And I have Mr. Basel Al-Dabakh, Managing Director of Siva Logistics for the region. I would request them to kindly introduce themselves before we get started. Shahab, if you will.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Arun. This is Shahab Al-Jasmi. I'm heading the commercial division for Port and Terminal in the UAE region. Basically looking after all the container business, general cargo business for Jabal Ali, Mena Rashid and Hamriya.
Thank you, Shahab, and I'm Basel Al-Dabakh. I'm in charge for the Levant region, plus Saudi Arabia, plus Egypt for Siva Logistics. I have been in the industry for over 17 years now, and before that, I was in other industries working across geographic regions from the Americas, North and South, and Europe and the Middle East.
Great, thanks very much, Shahab and Basel. And I do look forward to an enriching session for all of us here. If we could pull up the presentation, please. Thank you, Isam. So how we intend to spend the next 50 minutes is to start with a very brief presentation on the topic itself so that we're all on the same page, and then do an internal panel discussion to have Shahab and Basel share their perspectives on the topic, and then open up to a larger Q&A. If we could move to the next slide, please, Isam, or if you could give me control. Great. Now, why are sustainable supply chains so important that we spend an hour this afternoon on the topic? Well, this chart gives you the answer. Sustainability is no longer a nice-to-have topic that only visionaries in the organizations talk about. Today, it is a high-priority topic that CEOs, COOs, and all CXOs really talk about. And what this chart shows you is the difference in valuation between companies that are leading performers in sustainability versus those that aren't. And irrespective of the industry that you actually choose, whether it's chemicals, which is where I suspect many of you are from, or mining, where certainly some of you are, or energy or steel, which are all heavy industrial and very relevant to this region, you will find that leaders have more than 20% higher valuation than the ones who are bottom of the pile from a sustainability perspective. So working on sustainability makes financial sense in the here and now, and not sometime in the future. And again, if we go down to the next slide, please. Now, again, you've all heard of sustainability. It means different things to different people. One of the anchoring frameworks that we will use in today's discussion is really around emissions, and there's scope 1, which is operations related emissions. So emissions that are given out because of what you do within the 4 walls of your operation, if you will. Scope 2 is emissions related to energy and heat, electricity and heat to be very precise. And scope 3 is emissions related to the movement of the raw materials or the product. So there's scope 3 upstream, which is emissions related to getting raw materials and spares in, and scope 3 downstream, that is emissions related to getting the products out. That's just a little bit of the framework in terms of where we are. Now, again, if we go down, please. If you look at the full span of sectors across the world and ask the question, what does it take to be net zero from an emissions or a carbon footprint perspective? The answer really varies very widely depending on the industry that you're in. And let me explain this chart. What you see here is the mix of measures that are required in order to make an industry net zero. And if you have a lot of green in this chart, it means that it's easy to make your industry net zero because the starting point or the levers that are available are easy. If you see more red, then it is fundamentally far more difficult. Now, what is interesting is where chemicals stands. It's precisely in the middle of the pack, unfortunately, with a lot of yellow and red levers. And what that means is to make the chemicals industry, including its entire supply chain, net zero, the level of investment that is required, the level of organizational will that is required is very, very significant. Especially if you look at freight on the right-hand side, and freight by definition is about burning a lot of fuel, which invariably is hydrocarbon. As things stand today, you do end up creating a lot of emissions, and therefore you see a lot of red, especially on freight as an industry. And so this is the starting point based on technologies as they are available today. So what is the message for us? The message for us is the task ahead to decarbonize the chemical supply chain or supply chains of the region more broadly is not small. And we have it much tougher than many other industry and supply chains from across the world, in fashion, for instance. And again, if you go down, what are people doing to decarbonize? And we broadly think of these as 8 different levers. If we go down, I can do that. Great. And here is a summary of the 8 themes of action that companies are taking in order to make their supply chains net zero. Some of these are relatively less expensive, so the green ones, and some of these are much more expensive, which are the red ones. And let me walk through these in a bit of detail. So the first is, of course, recycling. It's a concept that's been around for a while. It's relatively high impact in terms of return on incremental investment. The worldwide maturity of the topic is very high. Adoption within GCC, in our view, is medium. There's still a huge opportunity to further improve recycling and circular economy. Material and process efficiency, which is really about doing things at the lowest cost, also helps in sustainability. And this is the second lever. Here, GCC is fairly advanced. The manufacturing technologies in oil and gas, in energy, in chemicals is actually pretty advanced and trend-setting in the world. Using renewable power is also a fairly inexpensive way to make your organization net zero. And the worldwide maturity has significantly increased as costs of renewable power have come down. Do we use enough renewable power in the region? The answer, as you all know, is not as much as what we should, and there's a huge opportunity to do so. Similarly, renewable heat, again, it's a bit more expensive. Adoption is low. Using newer processes, and if I take steel as an example, or some of the core chemicals processes, really using hydrogen as a fuel, for instance, is a great opportunity. Expensive as it stands now, and also with low adoption. And likewise, if you go down further down the slide, you will see further far-reaching levers such as a fundamental fuel switch, moving away from hydrocarbon dramatically to everything else, and also carbon capture, which is a fairly expensive process as it stands now. So today, if you're leading an organization that is looking aggressively at reducing emissions and making net zero, here is broadly the 8 range of actions that companies typically think of. And many of these have a significant scope for improved adoption within GCC. In GCC, we are blessed with another big lever, which at the face of it has a very nationalistic view to it, but really has huge dividends in terms of sustainability. And this is the topic of localization. And if you look at what many leading companies in the region have done, and some of the names are mentioned here, they have achieved remarkable success in the last decade in terms of local production and manufacture, either of their own internal manufacture or of their supply chains. And as a result of this, while of course more local jobs have been created, sustainability has also significantly improved. For one, you transport for much lower distances. So your scope 3 emissions by design have come down significantly. For another, because your supply chain is fundamentally short, the load on your supply chain in terms of the inventory in the warehouses is significantly lower. And third, purely because of proximity, your ability to control your vendors' adherence to supply chain protocols and sustainability protocols is much higher. So because of a set of these reasons, it may not have been the original target of localization, the GCC has an incredible opportunity to further improve the sustainability of their supply chains. So again, long way to go, but huge opportunity also ahead of us. What does this mean at the end of the day from a customer perspective? And is the task ahead really so difficult that it is unimaginably expensive? And the answer is no. And if you look at this slide, what we have aimed to do here is to put down the cost to actually make the product that you're buying net zero. So depending on the industry or the product that you're buying, of course, this value varies. If you're buying a car today, all you need to do to make it net zero is to pay 500 euros more. That is the actual cost that is required to make the steel and the plastics and the services that go into manufacturing a car net zero. So the difference is not really far off. And of course, this comes down significantly if you go more towards the right-hand side in terms of electronics and construction and so on and so forth. So where we are now is that technologies have been significantly advanced, that we can reach a net zero place in the near future if we already haven't reached it. And the cost of it is not exorbitant. It is on average just 2% for all products across the world. Of course, in steel and chemicals, it is more, but in some others, such as fashion and electronics, it is much lesser. So a world-class sustainability outcome is within our reach. So what can you as supply chain or procurement leaders therefore do in this situation? There are many things that you can do as leaders of the supply chain and the procurement organization, because you are at the interface of your company and the external world. And here are 9 ideas that you can personally drive in order to make your company's net zero. The first and the biggest challenge is creating transparency. Today, everybody defines sustainability as they wish. But there are enough metrics out there and standards in order to help put this in numbers and therefore establish a clear starting point. So establishing transparency and an emissions baseline for the vendors and the logistics providers of your organization is a very important starting point. Second, on the basis of that, then you define targets for scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions. And you actually give targets to your suppliers and your logistics providers. You work with them in order to establish these targets. The second pillar is about end-to-end optimization for carbon. What does this mean? Again, because you as the head of the supply chain are the trend spotter for your firm, you are likely to influence the way products are designed in a much more impactful manner. So driving the narrative about product redesign and service redesign is a very critical responsibility of yours and something that has great opportunity. So designing the products and your sourcing strategy around the entire sustainability theme is what we think is the next pillar. The third is engaging suppliers in a win-win manner. And this is very important because a one-sided establishment of rules to your logistics providers or suppliers typically is likely to backfire and is likely to result in huge increases in the cost of services and goods. What really works is a very senior level connect, starting with your most important suppliers on the sustainability vision and what needs to be done. And then from there, you work systematically on their individual initiatives. The fourth pillar is about pushing the ecosystem. Ecosystems are very immature as far as pricing sustainability initiatives are concerned. And it is therefore your responsibility as the head of supply chain to work with fellow supply chain leaders, the government and the industry associations to jointly lobby for change, to jointly push for regulations, and to work with powerful suppliers in order to drive the change. All of this has to be embedded with lever number 9, which is a combined supply chain vision and narrative within your organizations. If you are the only one as supply chain leader talking sustainability, and if your internal customers don't see it as priority, then the battle is as good as lost. So let me just stop here. A quick recap is, by nature of the industries that we have in the region, we are hard to abate in terms of carbon emissions. But given the technological advancements, we see that on average, just a 2% investment in the overall product cost can lead most companies to net zero. Localization has a huge additional benefit as well on sustainability, giving an added advantage to GCC companies. And last, you as supply chain leaders can have a full agenda if you want to play a central role in moving your organization towards sustainability. Let me just pause here in terms of this presentation, which was intended to get us all on the same page on the definitions and what needs to be done. And if my fellow panelists allow, I will now invite their perspectives on a set of topics. So, Basil, you as a person who looks at logistics more broadly, are probably having multiple discussions with your customers and your service providers on the other side. What are your thoughts on the nature of the topic, the importance that people are giving to sustainability, and what needs to be done?
Thank you, Arun, for the very interesting introduction and setting the context. Let me take a step back and say, okay, what is sustainability? And sustainability has a number of fronts, I would say. In your presentation, you focused on the emissions and decarbonization more than other fronts. But if I take a step back, and at CEVA, the way we look at it and we define sustainability is along 3 axes, if I may say. One is acting for people. Second is acting for planet. And the third is acting for responsible trade. So this is how we kind of define the sustainability. Let me add a little bit more color to that. So we start with acting with people for people. How can we make our business sustainable for its most important asset, which is its people? First and foremost, and especially in the current environment, it's the well-being, it's the health, and it's the safety of our employees. So to have a sustainable business, you have to have a healthy and safe workforce. So starting from COVID and how you change your processes to ensure the health and safety of your employees and their families, but also how you ensure that you create a safe environment free of accidents, where you target really 0 accidents, and you put the processes in place to have that. And in logistics, it is heavy on a lot of movement of goods and a lot of physical movements and loading and offloading and things of that nature, which requires really the physical safety and a lot of importance on that front. Now, that health and safety of the employees is one aspect of taking care of your people. Another aspect is that is very important for us is diversity and inclusion. It is very important to have a diverse workforce that reflects the population today. And it is important to have an inclusive approach to your employees. We have a number of initiatives that focus on gender diversity, not only on the lower ranks, but at the senior ranks, particularly on the leadership ranks. We have initiatives for diversity, but not only on the gender side, but I would say on a number of fronts as well. So we have several initiatives on how we create equal opportunity for differently abled people. And this is also when it creates a diverse and inclusive workforce, which creates a sustainable business. And it's very important. Then the last point under people is the community. So we do sustainable initiatives, not only for our employees and our people, but also for the people in the communities where we operate. And we've launched a program where every country has to have at least one community initiative every year where they volunteer their time to do some work that benefits the community where they live in. So this is, I wanted to shed some light on that. This is part of creating a sustainable business. Now, if I move to the second act that I mentioned, acting for planet. And here is first and foremost is the decarbonization and how we aim for a carbon neutral logistics. We are defining a plan this year it's a roadmap to target being carbon neutral by 2050, along with all the international agreements and initiatives. So we will be carbon neutral by 2050. And how do we do that? We look at it in two ways. First, our own operations. As a logistics service providers, we have our warehousing and we have the transport. On the warehousing side, we have, we are designing facilities that are carbon neutral by having photovoltaic power. We have over 40 facilities across the globe that have photovoltaic power generation. But I want to mention particularly one in the Netherlands where we are carbon positive. As a matter of fact, we generate more than when we consume, and the excess goes to the network. So that is important. Today, it's only one facility that is carbon positive, but we are working on having more and more in the future. Then on the transport side, which is really the biggest part of the emission comes from the transport, obviously. We look at greener ways of transportation, whether alternative fuels, or even for overland transportation, electric trucks and vans for the distribution. So that is important. And we are members of sustainability platforms on the ocean front and on the air front. On the ocean side, we are member of the Clean Cargo Group. And on the air freight side, we are member of SAFA, which is the Sustainable Air Freight Alliance. So being part of these platforms help us be, on the front line to pushing for sustainable modes of transportation. Then on the last side for decarbonization is how we work with our customers. We develop what we call digital carbon solutions. These are solutions to measure the CO2 emissions. And today, a number of logistics providers, when they propose a solution to their customer, they give them the choice between different solutions and show them each solution what is the carbon emission. And when typically the solution focus on time and price, now there is time and price and emissions. Then the customer can choose and have a better informed decision, and they can also track their emissions across the supply chain. Not to take too long, the last act that I mentioned is acting for responsible trade. Here we work with our customers and with our suppliers to be responsible in a way regarding the ethics and compliance. This is also a key point of a sustainable business. We have our code of conduct, and we push our code of conduct to all our suppliers. We audit ourselves internally, we audit our suppliers. And today, more and more of our customers are also focusing on us being able to comply with all our code of conduct and measure it and audit it and have the track records for that. So these are a little bit, sorry for the long answer, but I wanted to give an overview of the entire sustainability, the way we view it.
Thanks, Basil. That's very informative, very well-rounded perspective on sustainability, and also impressed to see all that SIVA is doing in order to drive net zero. That's great. Shahab, if I may move to you, you run one of the largest and successful port operations in the world now, and ports are at the center of supply chains. Now, what does sustainability mean to you as a leader in the ports business? And given the pandemic that happened last year, how has this topic been viewed? Is it more important, less? Is it being viewed differently?
Well, thank you, Aaron. Very good afternoon to you and all the ladies and gentlemen. I'm really so glad to be with all of you. This GPCA platform every year brings a fantastic exchange topics that we really hear from each other and exchange. And for me personally, for the past few years, I've been participating and benefiting a lot from the things that I'm hearing. Before I dwell into this topic, let me take you to the beginning of when this pandemic started. We all have no clarity. There were uncertainty of how this will impact the whole supply chain. All the elements, all the stakeholders of the supply chain were really unclear of the next step of how the business will continue. And for me, I think this was having a lot of advantages to the supply chain, and then again disadvantage, of course, with the which has come with the pandemic. Now, to have a better understanding of what sustainability and how sustainability has been affected, it's very important to keep in mind and get into more details on how we as a thermal operator exchange and correlate our business with all stakeholders for the supply chain. I'm referring here to the ocean activities, shipping lines, vessel owners and other type of ocean activities. Then, of course, terminal operators and all the stakeholders who really work in the ground. Then, of course, the process and the soft infrastructure and other activities that are related to the cargo delivery. Then again, whatever is happening beyond the gates. And of course, the people who are part of the supply chain and cargo delivery. I think the pandemic has pushed us to go towards a very advanced stage on automation, on exchanging and providing a services in a way that had a reflection on the sustainability and the overall business continuity that we had. There are so many things that really pushed our stakeholders, other government authorities, especially people in the maritime industry. The people in maritime industry, they were always lagging behind when it comes to technology and using automation for exchanging information. I think this was a major change that pushed everyone to go towards that. And in all the sectors, this has more or less impacted the sustainability, the information, and the exchange of cargo move. So basically, for us, the things that we have seen was setting the base for the future. And now I believe that we are going to the right direction. Things are really shaping better when it comes to cargo handling and the future of eliminating the risk of cargo delivery without really taking drastic decisions when it comes to making cargo delivery or delivering services to customers. You will always find it more sufficient, more environmental friendly, and in line with the practices that everyone is trying to follow.
Great, Shahab. Thanks very much. I think that's good to hear that the pandemic provided a bit of a trigger towards digitalization and, of course, towards sustainability. I think that is really quite helpful. Maybe moving back to you, Basil. Now, you talked quite a bit about SIVA's initiatives from a sustainability perspective. Now, when it comes to engaging with your customers in the market, how important is sustainability to them? And are they willing to make the right trade-offs where it matters in terms of paying a bit more for sustainable providers like yourselves versus not? And how is that narrative shaping?
Yeah, well, you know, in the last 15 months, this is the kind of the focus of this conference, is to look at the last 15 months and try to see what changes were there and what are the lessons learned. And the last 15 months really was about the resilience of the supply chain. And to have a sustainable supply chain, you need to have a resilient supply chain. And this is what our customers are really asking us about mostly, the resilience aspect. And this is where they are willing to make changes because they really experienced some disruption in the last 15 months. And they are willing to do the changes that maybe they were not they were reluctant to do in the past. So when I say the disruption in the last 15 months, let me go back from the start of COVID till today, remind you what we experienced in terms of disruption. You know, we at the very beginning of the outbreak in China, we went from no vessel, because there were no vessels operating, the ports were stopped, many carriers stopped operations. So we went from no vessels operating to then no space, because there were vessels operating, but very few of them, and there was really a space crunch. Then when there were a little bit more vessels operating, then we faced no equipment because of the trade imbalance. And after that, we faced no trucks when, you know, the ports were congested. When finally the vessels arrived with the equipment, there was a lot of congestion and we faced no trucks. So look at all of this disruption that we faced. And to top it all, not related to COVID, we faced no canal, with the Suez Canal being blocked. So in the last really 15 months, we faced severe disruption to our supply chain, and our customers are now talking, okay, how do we build more resilient supply chain networks? With the sometimes additional cost that comes with it. Speakers in the earlier sessions today, we heard that they are now willing to consider solutions that may be not the cheapest, but create a resilient, supply chain. For example, we talk to our customers, particularly customers in the chemicals and petrochemical industry, about advanced hub solutions. And this was also touched upon in the previous sessions. This creates really, reduces the risk a little bit to ensure that you deliver your goods to your customers. Today, the first issue is, will I be able to deliver to my customers the quantity of volume? Will I be able to produce it first? And then will I be able to deliver it in the right quantity at the right time in the right place? And so this is what we're talking to our customers about, and how we are working with them to redesign their supply chain to make them more resilient for the future.
Very helpful. And that's, you're right, last 15 months, you've seen more action than many industries, and you've been at the center of it. Thanks for sharing that perspective. If I may just stay on that point for a bit. Now, customers, of course, are willing to pay more for resilience. And is it fair to assume that resilience and sustainability are highly correlated? That your resilience is because of your sustainability focus as well?
Yeah, I mean, as per your presentation, we saw higher valuations for the companies that are really focusing on their sustainability on the number of fronts, whether it is on emissions, but also on companies that have more resilient supply chains. So I think the data shows it, and there is definitely correlation in that companies that focus on a sustainable business model are more highly valued.
Great, excellent. And we look forward to that. Shahab, moving back to you, and again, you very nicely shared the digitalization and sustainability initiatives. Now, if you were to be granted a magic wand where you could wave it and ask your customers, whether it is the shipping lines or whether it's the chemical and petrochemical companies, for a change in their behavior or a change in their processes, what would you ask for that would help ports and supply chains become even more sustainable?
Sure. See, Aaron, the automation and the innovation was really something that we have invested in long back. You know, Jebel Ali is the gateway for cargo, not only for Dubai and the UAE. We really serve the entire region. We connect Jebel Ali with the entire region, and then we play a very, very important role in ensuring the continuity of business. And as I said, and Basel said something very important about sustainability and some of the issues that they have faced. Because at the initial stage of this pandemic, people were really a bit struggling to cope with us. But this has really forced them. It's not optional anymore. It's forcible. People need to follow certain way of doing business, which is really changing the entire supply chain procedure and the way of doing business. It's really helping, and we have invested in so many areas. I have so many examples of activities and projects that we work together with trucking companies. So the example that Basel has mentioned about congestions at the gates, we're really pushing us to develop a more advanced system with connected to satellite with a proper tracking of these container and tracking moves into the gate and even beyond the gates. Now, the additional part that we have developed is to integrate this with our customers. So basically, they can track the tracking movement and then improve all type of their planning and have an advanced planning for cargo movement, readiness of their warehouses to receive the cargo or prepare it for the load of containers. In terms of shipping lines and receiving vessels, we are by far the biggest and the largest in terms of capacity, in terms of different terminals that we manage, all type of shipping lines and alliances that formed by the shipping lines. We have really worked very, very closely with these shipping lines for the past 2 decades, 3 decades to exchange information, planning their vessels, pre-arrival, planning and doing all housekeeping for arranging the yards. All this will have a great impact on sustainability. It will ensure less carbon dioxide emission consumption, and it will ensure that we also provide efficiency. We save a lot of time. Actually, the financial impact of this is in long term is much greater than anyone can anticipate. It's good for all the stakeholders, and we believe now that the next step for us is to bring all the stakeholders together and look for different type of initiatives that we think it will impact not them directly, but really it will have an impact on their customers as well. We have introduced recently the e-delivery order. Basically, shipping lines have the counters to receive the traders, PROs, agencies to collect documents, pay money, and all these type of human intervention to this type of activities. We have really gone beyond the gate, look at their services and how we can really improve this further. How it will impact us? It is, yes, it is indirectly, but we feel the more resilience supply chain and services you have with your partners, your customers, and the entire chain of business, it will eventually benefit us because we will be in a better position we will be more efficient, and of course, best utilization of your equipment. This is from customer perspective. Here internally, we have done a lot of activities really to improve and such of great initiatives that will really change the way this industry is being operated. We have most advanced automated terminals, and we just started the terminal 4. We call it ghost terminal. We don't have people operating this terminal. It's been remotely operated from a building located in a different zone, in a different location. That is really has improved the efficiency, vessel turnaround time, truck turnaround time at terminals. You can imagine the amount of fuel consumption, other safety aspects that the whole entire this type of initiatives will bring together. We have also developed a new concept called box bay. It's like a multi-story building, like a shelving for containers. It was an idea, our leaders believed on it, and we just recently handled 10,000 containers. This is really saving a lot of container moves within a single terminal. It's saving huge spaces, it's saving time, cost effective, and of course, vessel will have a faster operation and management. We will really keep investing in such initiatives. This concept of box bay, when it's successfully being implemented as we see now, the next step for us to develop this concept across all the terminals that we own and operate globally. We have more than 80 terminals in different parts of the world. We drive as DP World this change, and we believe that it will be a catalyst for a new way of doing business, and it's an improvement, and at the end of the day, it's also a good business.
Of course, very inspiring to hear that, especially the Terminal 4, the Ghost Terminal, and the number of other initiatives that you're doing. I think that's great. And let me pick on that thread and also move to the question and answers that are being asked by our esteemed audience who have been patiently waiting. Now, one of the questions that comes up, which is related to what both of you were talking about, is what should we do to be even better prepared if a pandemic like this were to hit us next time? And again, Basil, I'm going to put you on the spot here and invite your perspectives on what more needs to be done by logistics companies like yourself, but also the rest of the ecosystem to be more prepared.
Right. So we should look at creating a more diversified supply chain, in a sense where you have more options and more suppliers and more routes. With time, a lot of our customers have created a supply chain and they are set in their ways, but it's the time to create alternatives for yourself. One option is the advanced hub, as I mentioned before, but also now, and you touched on it in your presentation, is how you have localization and local input from the local markets or the regional markets, as opposed to bringing all the way from across the globe. Because when supply chain disruption hits, it is much easier usually to deal with it if your suppliers are closer to you, as opposed to having them far. So you have to develop a different profile of suppliers, geography-wise and capability-wise. You have to look at different routes. You have to look at different modes, and this is the way to really create a more resilient supply chain.
Great, excellent points there. And again, Shahab, same question to you. If a pandemic like this were to hit again, what should we be doing now to be even better prepared?
Sure. I think, Aaron, people have learned a lesson in a very hard way. Today, I'm speaking about Jebel Ali and Dubai. There is no barriers or obstacles for people to move any type of cargo, any type of critical goods from the port to any of the warehouses or the shelves. The thing is that the people who are part of this supply chain need to really enhance their capabilities, their systems, and some of smart companies, big companies like SIVA have really invested in this type of activities. But you see, the supply chain depends on big guys, big players, and the smaller people as well. I see now more of smaller players are being really investing and are positioning themselves in a way that they will make sure with the diversion of business, and we all know that e-commerce is becoming a very common now. I'm sure every one of us have family members, kids even ordering everything via e-commerce. It's becoming very popular, and we have developed such of the activities like for the smaller restaurants, for the smaller delivery companies, the apps and the type of solutions that people are widely using. I think this will keep improving, and people will be adopting this more and more. We need to educate ourselves. Smaller players need to really differentiate themselves. It will be next the place for only this type of people who can really cater for this type of advanced technology.
Those are very great points. Thanks very much, Shahab. Yes, indeed. Indeed, technology is a critical catalyst towards moving towards sustainability. And again, back to you, Basel. You mentioned in your opening remarks that SIVA is planning to be net zero by 2050, if I'm not wrong, right? And again, I'm going to sort of put you on the spot here. What would it take for you to be net zero even earlier? And let's say by 2030, just to sort of, stretch the boundary a little bit. Is it more around technology? Is it more around ecosystem, or is it something else that needs to change for you to get there?
Right. So how do you become, carbon neutral in the first place? There's a number of factors. You can look at alternative fuels. You can look at biofuels. Today, you can look at LNG vessels, for instance, and this is as a part of the group that SIVA Logistics is part of. We are looking at LNG vessels. So you reduce your emissions in one hand by using fuels that emit less. But also we look at how we can not have the emission to begin with. So for example, more optimized routes and more optimized inventory levels that then push you to have less transport to begin with. So you are eliminating part of the transport, and then the part of the transport that you have, you go with alternative fuels that have lower emissions, or also green sources of energy, whether electric or other types. So this is really how we are looking at it. Plus, there is an important factor is where you compensate by doing, for example, in the reforestation efforts, where you can, neutralize the inevitable emissions that you have in your system. So these are the fronts you look at to get to carbon neutral. Now, if we can make it before 2050, of course, that would be a great achievement. It's going to depend really on a number of factors that I'm not expert in, but I hope we can achieve it.
Indeed, great. No, I think that's a nice statement there. Now, questions to both of you, to Shahab yourself and to Basel. Now, isn't there an inherent risk of business downside if sustainability becomes very important? And let me explain. Basel, you made a point about reduced inventory and reduced movement and localization. If you localize a lot, then there's a lot of activity which by definition gets done locally, and your need for imports, for instance, gets lesser. So question to both of you, as we push sustainability, isn't there a downside risk on the commercial side for a port or a logistics company?
Okay, shall I start?
Please.
Aaron, very good question, actually. That was a concern for many people. And let me give you an example. The new rule of shipping maritime industry for using the low sulfur fuel, and then they have been postponing implementing this rule for many years, till they have reached to the point that they have really forced it. All the parties were really concerned from a supply perspective, if they have other options, and how they will really change the systems and the engines and equipped with the different type of engineering to cope with this type of activities. I believe that any such initiative at the initial stages, it will have some cost impact. It will have downstream of how the business being operated. But in long term, we all as human, we really adapt ourselves. We learn. Yes, we resist any change, but for sake of a better earth and better life of our families, our people, I think this is something that we need to go through. Many countries have been in advance, and they may be lost some of their market share due to the cost impact of such initiatives. And then we see today other industrial countries like China. China has been changing big time. The focus on environment and the cost for production has really changed, and I'm sure all of you have noticed that. So today, some of European companies are in a much better position than Chinese companies for certain sectors. That means it is a long-term investment, is for future, and the initial stages will be challenging, but for future things will be brighter and better for them.
I don't have much to add to Shahab's answer. It's really very comprehensive, and I have the same thoughts. Thank you, Shahab. I would add, again, echoing what Shahab mentioned. On the short term, sometimes there is cost, there is people who get disadvantaged, but on the long term, it's for the benefit of all, and it usually compensates and overcompensates. A number of examples. So for trucking, in the GCC, they are imposing in Saudi Arabia requirement on the age of trucks and the quality of trucks. This creates extra costs for transporters, but on the long run, it is better for everybody. Another example, when rail came up in the GCC, especially the rail across the GCC, and UAE started developing transporters, panicked a little bit, the truck transporters, but eventually they readapt. Again, as Shahab mentioned, they readapt. Instead of focusing on the long haul, they focus on the spoke, because hub to hub is better movement on the rail, and then they focus on the spoke. So they redesign their solutions and adapt, and overall it is better for everyone. But here I would like to have more involvement between companies and the government, because the government is capable to, with the right regulations, with the right incentive, to kind of reduce the cost somehow on the side that is getting disadvantaged. Also, regulations of government are key, for example, in terms of when we talk about circular supply chains. You mentioned it as one of the 8 levers that we can look at. And you mentioned in the slide, something captured my attention, is that worldwide the adoption is high, but in the Middle East and GCC it's still medium. I think there is a role to play here, but this role has to be jointly between manufacturers, logistics providers, and the government to be able to push circularity forward. It will have a cost, but ultimately it will be to the better of everyone.
Great points, and a very nuanced way to sort of bring the discussion to the end. I'm just going to take one last response. There was a question there which said, if it's so easy to make supply chains net zero, just the 2% sort of cost, why aren't people doing it? And the answer, dear attendee, is that the movement is happening as we speak. Companies are, and to Basil and Shahab's point, they're all realizing that becoming net zero and more sustainable is really in the realm of reality. And there is constant movement in all directions, whether it's digitalization driven, regulation driven, or actually cost benefit driven. The movement is happening as we speak. So it's really not sort of something that's completely out there and and in the long distance. So with that, I would hand over back to you, Udit. Thanks very much for having us, and we certainly enjoyed this discussion, and we do hope the attendees enjoyed the discussion as well. Back to you, Udit.
Arun, the pleasure has been all ours. Thank you, all of you, for your excellent contribution to make this masterclass outstanding. I think the insights were beautiful, and I'm sure our audience has learned a lot from it. I know I have definitely taken a lot from it. So with that, we bring to close an excellent and insightful day, and I look forward to meeting all of you tomorrow as well. Tomorrow, the session will start at the same time as it did today, 11 o'clock UAE, and my colleague, Mr. Kim Winter, will be your host for tomorrow. So this is me signing off for today. Wish you all a very happy evening. Please stay safe and stay healthy. And we look forward to meeting all of you in person very soon, inshallah.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.